want to thank everybody again for joining us for Tuesday Talks. Today's guest speaker, guest presenter, guest talker, Alan Chumley. And I met Alan more than 10 years ago, probably about in and around 2007 timeframe, when he was working in Canada and he was doing measurement and evaluation in Canada. He has his undergraduate and graduate degrees here from Canada, did a master's of communications and culture from York Ryerson, and then worked in the telecom business with Bell Canada and a couple other companies in Canada before moving to the United States 10 years ago. And he currently resides in Austin, Texas, and he's working for W2O Group. And so if people don't know the W2O Group, it has a very special connection to our partnership with Syracuse University, because Jim Weiss was a graduate of the PR program at Syracuse and has a strong connection with the Newhouse School, set up the Center for Social Commerce with Dean Branham. And Gary Greats, my colleague and an alum of the Syracuse Master's Program, is also a principal in W2O. They are growing. I think, did I not just see they won Agency of the Year just last week? Right. It was announced as well.
That's right. Large Agency of the Year by Holmes, or Provoke as they're now known.
Yeah, yep. And they're located across across the U.S. And I've always said to Gary and Jim that one of the big areas that they're missing, I think, is Canada. But you can ring that bell for us, Alan, as well. So W2O really looks at this notion of relevance. How relevant are you in the eyes of your key stakeholder groups? And they have developed their own measurement system to be able to do that as well. So without further ado, Alan, I'm going to turn it over to you. Thanks for joining us today.
I appreciate the invitation. Thank you. And it's exciting for me to be here with y'all. See what I did there, Recovering Canadian. It's taken me a while to do that. Look, I'm a huge fan of the MCM program. Quick history lesson. I went and did, Terry, that joint York Ryerson degree precisely because the MCM program hadn't existed yet. It was in your head and on paper, but you hadn't started it yet. So gosh, I wish I was came along a little later to be able to do that. So maybe one day when you do a PhD version, I'll come looking for you. Wink, nudge. So yes, it's kind of ironic and fitting to be here with you all. This is, and Terry, you stole some of my thunder, so I can skip this. This is far too many words on a slide, but a little bit about W2O Group, more than what Terry's told you. We are an agency of 1,400 people. When I joined 3 years ago, we were an agency of 700 people. We've doubled in 3 years in size. 27% year-on-year revenue growth, some of that by way of acquisition, some of it by way of organic, mostly in the US, some London. We are landing and expanding in Asia as we speak. I was on the phone with them this morning. So of those 1,400 people, 140 of whom, 10%, are in analytics, which relative to the Hill & Knowltons and the Fleischmann Hillards that I've been at before is disproportionately large investment by design in analytics. So we are, when we say analytics first, analytics at the center, we don't do a darn thing without the analytics. We genuinely mean it down here. That's one of the reasons why I came here from Fleischmann. Here's what I thought I would do with y'all today, with your permission, in the next kind of 30 minutes, and then we'll get to Q&A, is a little bit more than what Terry's offered on kind of what we mean by relevance, how we think, why we think it's important, how it's measured, lost, gained, sort of the anatomy of what it means to be a relevant organization based on our tracking of 240 companies over the last 3 years. These are early days for us as we build out this point of view and this method, and some case studies. So we'll pivot out of kind of the theoretical into the practical, and then some Q&A. Just a quick tech check. Are you all still seeing my slides okay here?
We are.
All right. Good. Thank you, Zoom. Don't you all wish you had stock in Zoom? Maybe some of you do. Lucky. Probably bought a boat by now. So here's my little cocktail party trick. Recovering PR practitioner before I went to the kind of analytics side. Ask anyone who does comms for a living to describe what they do for a living in 25 or fewer words, and I promise you get some twist on this theme of project and protect reputation. I call it the communicator's mandate, or the Marcomer's mandate in 3 words. And why do we do that? I know we're all highly strategic, the MCM program in particular. We do that for these reasons on the right. Non-exhaustive list of goals, not quite objectives, but ultimately it's about projecting and protecting reputation. Could also say brand. So look, I grew up reading Fombrun. I more recently kind of disciple of Craig Carroll and just about everything else out there that you all are putting out there as well. So huge fan of Reputation. Let me say that. It matters, and it matters in highly financially tangible ways. I've borrowed some data here from Reputation Institute or now known as RepTrack. And because they've been doing this stuff for 30 years, they've done multivariate regression analysis. They've been able to say that, look, even a single point shift in a reputation score can generally yield about a 2% bump in market cap, which for the companies that company is tracking in the US can mean about $1 billion per point. So this stuff matters. It matters in a very tangible financial way. It is massively, massively important. Reputation matters. However, here's the however. It's our point of view that traditional definitions, ways of thinking about reputation, ways of measuring it, at least on their own, are aging and limiting. So in our view, it's not a relevance or reputation, it's a relevance and reputation. I should be very careful here. I want to acknowledge all the wonderful work that I know Leger, Terry, you're doing with them, that I'm cursorily aware of from way down south here. So consider this slide a poke, a nudge at kind of the US market more than anything. There's no shortage of really outstanding methodologies out there. They are generally, not exclusively, but generally survey-based. They're generally a perceptual representation. That's fine. There's huge value in that. We have clients who do that in addition to what you're going to see from us here in terms of relevance. But the idea here is that one of the youngest methods here in the States predates Twitter, and holy cow, hasn't the world moved on a whole lot since then in terms of how people seek information out about a company, how they think about you, perceive you, and most importantly, engage with you and interact with you. So relevance in our view is all about engagement, 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 and audience specific. So, okay, relevance matters too. I would argue more, maybe a bit provocative. Relevance in our view is a macro to reputation as a micro. It's a pusher, shaper, shover, driver. It's digital, it's agile, it's nimble, it's quicker and cheaper. We can do this weekly if we wanted to. We don't, that'd be nuts. And relevance, based on the 3 years of data that we're tracking, is relevance leaders are disproportionately among these things that we said earlier on that corp commers are after from a mandate perspective: admired, innovative, attractive employers, and driving financial contribution to market cap. So we say, look, relevance maps and closes the gap between the platform. Note I'm saying platform, not campaign. Think bigger, think Dove and what they do for women's body image as a platform broadly with little campaigns tucked underneath it. So it's the gap between what companies are out there with from a platform perspective and stakeholder expectations, what they want, what they need, what they're engaging with, what they're talking about. That orange diamond in the middle had better be a point of intersection more than a gap. If it's a gap, we sure better close it real quick. And so we say that relevance resides at that intersection of like cultural, political, social, currency, and urgency. So it's a giant gap analysis in a way. It's quantitative, but it's also text analytics. I'll come back to that. So as a way of thinking, as a way of counseling clients, it's really just about saying, look, we need to be attuned to our stakeholder wants and needs. I mean, PR from 100 years ago. We better be topical, timely, genuine, yes, authentic, agile, okay. But increasingly, we're urging clients to take some risks, to be bold, to be provocative. And in the healthcare space, it's particularly tricky. Be differentiating at minimum, disruptive if you think you can get away with it. And so all this to say that relevance invites action, it invites engagement, it invites kind of a big old do moment for organizations. And it invites companies to have stakeholders rally behind something big. I'll show you what this looks like in a minute. Getting more specific, more detailed, we say that like to be relevant is to be, and here my OU sounds, recovering Canadian, are gonna come out, thought about, sought out, talked about, engaged with, and believed in. Okay, great in theory, but we're actually measuring each of these things and then some quite specifically. Again, it's a combination of quantitative scoring. It's with deep text analytics. Some of that's AI, some of it's human coding. It's a combination of internal data sources and signals. It's a combination of external data sources and signals. About 10 in particular, most publicly available, some proprietary. And so the specific signals in our case, given, remember, we are a healthcare specific agency, are stakeholders in that healthcare ecosystem. All of this to do what? Essentially answer the question, to baseline and then measure over time. Are we as an organization, say Merck or Pfizer, Promised myself I wouldn't mention client names, but I just did. Are we as an organization relevant with the stakeholders that matter to us and on the topics that matter to them? And if not, if we've got gaps, we better close it right quick. Again, PR strategy 101, but a very focused way of measuring these gaps and closing these gaps over time. So who doesn't love a good radar chart in a deck? I've got a couple of those. This is a high-level example of what this looks like at minimum. And again, it is more than strictly quantitative scoring. The secret stuff is really into the content analytics. This is real data for a pitch we're working on for Monday, as a matter of fact. I've blinded the companies. I think I have. I hope I have. Yes. Good. I won't get fired for this today. And so we see that the company that we're pitching is the red line in the middle. Point is, they've got a big old gap between the other competitors generally. And we see that even if they caught up to the other competitors on, an overall score, employee support, employee values and culture, CEO approval, the extent to which financial analysts understand their long-term strategy and are recommending buy stock, are they being sought out? Are they searched for? Are they being engaged with? Is the healthcare ecosystem, those stakeholders, are they engaging with this organization? The answer for this organization in red is unfortunately no, no, no. And oh my God, you got a huge gap between you and the competitors. Even if you did catch the competitors, it is kind of a staggering sea of sameness, and you're going to have to do something big and bold and beautiful to get stakeholders to rally behind it and break through the other side of the stakeholders. When we look at breaking it out, kind of healthcare specific stakeholders in particular, the gap is even more pronounced. Here we're looking at the extent to which the organization, the red line, are being talked about and engaged with among doctors, healthcare practitioners that are doctors, healthcare practitioners that are not doctors, patients, advocacy groups, advocacy individuals, healthcare media. I should pause here. We're doing all this in a data privacy compliant way. We're not getting anyone into any trouble, but we do have a database that we started a decade ago that we continue to feed and tend to every darn day. That's 2 million stakeholders in the healthcare ecosystem. It's not quite right to say that it's like a Sysomos for healthcare, but it's that and more. So we're constantly tagging and querying against that database to be able to identify people as a patient and as a doctor and what they're talking about. Okay, so the point is we've got gap with these priority audiences compared to competitors, in particular where it's related to healthcare practitioners that are not doctors, so nurses. This is an oncology example, I believe. So we sure better build a strategy around reaching oncology nurses to, push the relevance for this organization. So you may have noticed a couple of scores on the previous slides. Here we, and I won't read this to you, here we take some time to unpack what a score means. I almost, though, say scorecard, schmorecard. What's more important than the actual number in absolute terms is the shift in that number in relative terms over time, and the composition that's tucked underneath that number. Is it the oncology nurses in Texas that are the problem? And so it invites a tactical response. It invites a new strategy. But generally, when we see clients that are kind of sitting in the, let's say, 56 to 64 susceptible range. What does that mean? It means their relevance, if you like, reputation, is vulnerable. It's at high risk. It means that if you do nothing immediately or nothing significantly differently than what you have been historically, then you're surely going to continue to slip as your competitors, your peers are out there trying to pull ahead of you. And so we say, I won't read these to you either, but again, tracking 240 companies over 3 years, we do spot some macro patterns here, both generally and I would say specific to COVID recently. By the way, we've been doing a relevance COVID report every 2 weeks. And that's available on our website if you're interested, and I can send those through. But generally, look, it's almost like, Terry, I'm reminded of the work, gosh, this was 12 years ago, your Maple Leaf Foods, the Listeria crisis, the reputation before and after, and I might get the headline wrong, but it was because they came into the crisis with a strong reputation, they were more resilient and more adaptable and weathered it quicker and more easily afterward. I hope I got that right. Same idea here, though, with relevance, that to be relevant generally, to adopt that kind of framework, that point of view, that way of operating, that way of thinking, that way of engaging with stakeholders, means that you are more resilient, generally speaking, through pandemics. And now, obviously, civil unrest down here is kind of what we're looking at for clients as well. So to be relevant is to be more resilient. It's about sustainability. It urges transparency, frequency, collaboration, partnership. It urges empathy, authenticity. It really does force clients to put their money where their mouth is, and actions speak louder than words, and actually like actualize their purpose and their values, stand up for who they are. And, you know, Captain Obvious, but alignment with stakeholders, massively, massively important. So again, I mentioned, even though this is early days for us compared to other methods out there, 3 years, 240 companies, we are only just now running kind of the regression analysis to tease out patterns in a more sophisticated way. But I can tell you what I see so far, and that is that, okay, gosh, being relevant is hard, which is why so few really are. It's sort of a sobering slide that ends up in just about every one of our pitch decks, and clients, when they see this, they either nod and self-identify and say, yeah, you're right, you got us, or, oh my God, really? We're that bad? So I'm not gonna name names, but generally speaking, trickier to be relevant in the healthcare industry than Fortune 100. I appreciate that some of these healthcare companies in the States are so big, they are Fortune 100, there's about a dozen of them. But generally speaking, only about 6% of healthcare companies are what we would call, quote, relevant. Only about 8% of Fortune 100 are. And so we're noticing that it's a bit like your fitness regime after Thanksgiving or Christmas. Relevance is super hard to gain. It's hard to keep. It's quick and easy to lose. And when it's gone, gosh, you know, you need to fight for every square inch that you gain back. Okay, so busy slide. This is why Alan Chumley does not do design for a living. Forgive me. I will unpack what you're looking at here. So we say, look, relevance is hard because the media narrative is just so cluttered, and it's tricky to break through and to continue to break through. So what this is, it's theme clustering, ultimately. We took hundreds of thousands of news clips in the healthcare space, in the US, I should point out, given the audience, and ran them through a proprietary theme clustering method that we've got. It's AI, it's machine learning, it's neural network mapping for the nerds among you. If you want to nerd out on this later, we can certainly do that. To do what? To surface not really the most written about topics, but the most engaged with topics. So what are folks feeling strongly enough about to share? Why engagement? It underpins the whole ethos of relevance. Sought out, thought about, talked about, engaged with among your stakeholders that matter to you. That's what we're after. Okay, this is 2018. What does it tell us? It tells us that the media landscape that companies are being asked to operate within is cluttered. Most of these themes are contentious, they're episodic. So this idea of being portrayed at all, being included in this, being portrayed positively in this mess, let alone in a differentiated manner, is going to be so darn tricky. And so relevant companies have got to be more than just like reactively present in the major news themes that are episodic. You might call these heartbeats, healthcare, haha, but they need to be more proactive, ongoing, sustained, always on, filling in the valleys, if you like. Yes, attuned to stakeholder wants and needs. And I'm going to hit this theme repeatedly, but cross-pay, so you know this, paid, earned, shared, owned, all of these channels need to be kind of pushing on all cylinders at all times with a consistent, bold narrative from this organization. So that was 2018, this is 2019, same deal, slightly different topics. I'll toggle back. If we look at 2018, gosh, it was all about opioids, opioids, opioids on the bottom, and that was a heck of a year for many of our clients in healthcare. 2019, politics, politics, politics. Thank you, Mr. Trump. And we see things like pricing way up top. Huge issue down here in 2018, far less so in 2019. It's going to come back with a vengeance a little later on in 2019. So anyway, point is, this is the media narrative landscape, not so much the topics that are being written about, but what people are sharing, what they're engaging with. And if we want to be mindful of closing that gap between us as an organization and stakeholders, then this is the environment that we need to be mindful of. Okay, so again, 240 companies, 3 years. There really are patterns in what the anatomy of a relevant organization looks like. Non-exhaustive list here. These are organizations who are always, always, always sharpening their narratives, their corporate positioning, their key differentiators. These are organizations that where it makes sense to do so, making sure there's maximum alignment between internal and external narratives. If those are misaligned, danger, problem. I'll come back to that. These are organizations that are intensifying their focus on values and purpose. They are largely because there's some great research out of Gartner that says, gosh, about a year ago, that stakeholders are expecting, no, demanding that organizations take a bold stance on an issue of societal, political, cultural currency and urgency. So not only do they demand it, but they're saying that they are willing to help, that they'll reward you for it. And if you give them something big enough to rally behind that is in line with their values and purposes and beliefs, that they'll help you do it. So we're seeing organizations ever more transparent, ever more emboldened to take some risks, to engage stakeholders and have stakeholders tell their story in a different way than has been historically the case. Employee engagement and advocacy, I'm going to show you a real example of where we've been able to help an organization close this gap. And we're seeing more than just sort of conference circuit lip service being paid to organizations adopting storytelling as a strategic management skill, not just a tactic. Thought leadership, of course, and then always on cross pay. So we have some data, different report for different day that says dormancy drives irrelevancy. If you're not out there, always on, relevancy suffers. All right, so huge oversimplification in 3 bullets on the right here of 3 years of work, 240 companies. But if we remind ourselves that to be relevant is to be thought about, sought out, engaged, talked about, believed in. As we look of relevance gained and lost, it really is primarily a story of CEO approval and CEO support. Not only, but it is by far the biggest single driver. If we're out there measuring 12 to 15 things, it's always, always, always the level of approval that employees have for the CEO. As it bounces up and down, almost everything else is bouncing up and down. Culture, positive business outlook, so on and so forth. Recommend. And so here we're saying, yes, of course, that external media environment is massively important. Yes, of course, external stakeholder groups are massively important. But if you don't have a clean house first, you're in trouble. And so relevance begins within. Get your employees to understand their role in the strategy, get your employees to understand the long-term innovative vision of the organization, put the right tools and platforms in their hands to have them extend and amplify that company narrative externally, and which is going to be reached by all of these other stakeholders, then you're on to something. So if you've got CEO approval problem, internal employee culture problem, you need to fix that first. 2 real quick case studies, and I'm going to keep an eye on time here so we can get to some Q&A. I'd love to hear from y'all. A little bit of blend here, but 2 different applications for how we use relevance. The first in a more kind of strategy shapey formative context, the second more in an evaluative measurement context. And I hope I don't name names here. If I do, pretend you didn't hear it. So new client to us 2 years ago, rare disease company in need of desperate need of a rebrand, and certainly new messaging. They came to us by way of RFP and said, gosh, we're struggling out there. I'll show you why in a minute. Do we change our name? Do we run and hide from this stuff? Do we change our logo? We say, no, your name is fantastic. There's equity there. Keep your name. You want to change your logo and your colors? Great. Fine. But what you really need is a new way of thinking, a new way of operating, and certainly a new set of positioning, messaging, and kind of a narrative manifesto, if you like. And by the way, a plan. So cheesy design here, forgive this, but relevance in this strategy shaping context, in this context of helping this organization understand who they are now, who they want to be, who they should be, and to whom and in the eyes of whom, looked partially like this. They used to be called Company X Pharma. They switched to Company X Therapeutics. Okay, subtle but an important distinction. Historically, I'll show you this in a bit, they were known only for 2 drugs, not the 12 drugs that they have in varying stages of innovation and development and approval and such. They were, I'll show you this in a minute, awash in merger and acquisition news. They were buried in pricing. They were getting slammed on pricing. So all that to say, they didn't feel that they weren't adequately getting credit for this kind of new emerging company that they were becoming. I remember hearing on the pitch call the phrase, we want to come off the puppy porch and get into the yard with the big dogs. Okay, that's funny, but I get it. And so they weren't getting enough credit for this new organization that they were. They weren't known for who they really were. And fast forward to, okay, new branding, new sort of messaging, new positioning, I think they called it a narrative manifesto. Okay, that's cute, but great. New way of thinking about engaging stakeholders, a new weekly way of getting content in front of stakeholders, and so on and so forth. So skip. Sample scorecard, this is real data. This is a vast oversimplification of the quantitative assessment that we put in front of them. Again, remember that relevance is almost scorecard, schmorecard. More importantly than this is the drivers, the detractors, what's behind all of this, the content analysis, the gap analysis, language we as an organization are using versus what our stakeholders are using, and let's close that. In some cases for clients, we're measuring that gap monthly. So what does this tell us? It tells us, gosh, we're pretty weak, we're shaky. If we do nothing differently, we're in some trouble here. We have a stronger internal story than we do external. That's great. Begin within. Let's leverage that foundational strength externally and push, push, push externally. We're not particularly sought out. We're not being searched for. People aren't thinking highly enough of our content to share it. And oh my gosh, when you look at the healthcare ecosystem audience in particular, so patients, advocacy groups, researchers, medical societies, God, they barely know that we exist, let alone talk about us or engage with us. So you see how this immediately lends itself to, these are weaknesses that we need to close by way of a strategic plan. I'll skip through some of these to get to some juicier stuff, but we looked at financial analyst reports, again, deep theme clustering to surface for them that, hey, you're not doing too badly with the financial analysts, but you as an organization are not getting as much credit as your competitors are in the eyes of the financial analysts in terms of being thought about your pipeline, your research and development, your innovation. So we got a big old gap that we need to close there. Mind the gap, cheesy clip art, but again, there was a huge gap between, there was some strength from the financial analyst community. Saying we sort of seem to get your long-term vision and your strategy, but gosh, employees sure didn't. Step one, begin within, clean house, make sure they understand their role in the long-term strategy. Make sure you're giving them the platform, process, people, the tools, the pre-approved syndicated content to push that company narrative externally, reaching those stakeholders. By the way, this is around the point where I generally go on a rant where I say, remember your employees are also advocates. They're also patients. They are also investors and shareholders. So to think of employees as exclusively an internal audience is, in my view, is like, 30-year-old thinking. So I mentioned pricing. If you look closely enough, you'll see the name of the client. Don't. They were getting slammed for having, it was, CNN, front page, Wall Street Journal, $50,000 per month for this particular medication. I don't recall what it is or what it's for, doesn't matter. They were getting absolutely trounced in the US pricing context. And so this is in part what led them to say, oh my gosh, help. We're getting buried under something that is not really what we want to be known for. Fine. Again, more theme clustering. We looked at earned media of them on the left versus all of their competitors at aggregate on the right. This is intentionally a petri dish looking thing. We are a healthcare agency after all. So point of this, it's intentionally complex. It's supposed to make you kind of go cross-eyed and say, what the heck is this? Well, exactly. The point is that, from an earned media perspective, they were swimming in what we call a staggering sea of sameness relative to the competitors. So there was zero differentiation, one. And two, problematically, again, they're getting slammed on pricing and they're just getting forgotten about on all sorts of merger and acquisition related news and not out there telling a more innovative, patient-centric story. So all that to say, all that in a blender, weeks of analysis, big old report, lots of money, and but the scorecard, schmorecard, again, if we don't do anything with that score, then it's pointless to do. So it's formative strategy shaping to lead to a plan and then ultimately to lead to measurement down the road as well. So what these scores are don't matter, but if you look for red, those are the gaps and those are the weaknesses that we got all of them in the room and prioritized, looked at sort of their calendar of events, their pipeline coming up, looked at their stakeholder audiences, and we can't do it all, but let's prioritize what's the low-hanging fruit. What do we need to do most that's going to have the most value externally, in this case, because their internal stuff wasn't too bad and not really in much of a need of fix, with the exception of the employee positive business outlook being a bit behind. Importantly, too, we had in the room VP of PR, VP of CorpCom, VP of Employee Relations, Brand, Digital, Marketing, Government Affairs, Investor Relations, so sort of multidisciplinary communications, broadly, group, even marketing and digital, because they all had a role to play in this kind of cross-peso strategy that ultimately fell out of this. And so I'll skip to the next case study here. I won't read these bullets to you. Fast forward, this company came from a place of, we're only known for 2 drugs. We're getting hammered for pricing. We need to get out there and tell our full story, and we don't know how to do that. And all they were doing was issuing press releases, the old school spray and pray, to a more authentic, stakeholder-centric, relevance-centric, kind of an agile and a weekly, I call it like a editorial meeting scrum, supported by analytics, supported by relevance, where they are asking themselves these hard questions. Is this stuff going to resonate with our stakeholder? No, it hits the editing room floor. Does this stuff speak to our purpose and our why and our values and purpose? No, hits the editing room floor, gone. Point is, the relevance frame has helped them really kind of triangulate and focus in on who their stakeholders are, what they need to be putting in front of them, and what's resonating with them. And they have massively mobilized their employee base in terms of content. I think this particular company does. I'll tell you all later offline who they are. A spectacular job at kind of LinkedIn specific executive thought leadership as part of the mixture here. And so the, relevance has emboldened this company to kind of step outside their norm, to be agile, to take some risks, and it's working. Second case study, and then we'll get to questions. I'll whip through this real quick. Major pharmaceutical company, like top 1, 2, or 3 by revenue and number of employees. You could probably guess who they are if you look at the coloring closely enough. So, okay, the joke down here is that, gosh, all healthcare companies want to be perceived as innovative, pharmaceutical companies in particular. We say, I hope so, given you do research and development for a living and you're innovating new medications. So yes, but kind of what else you got? If we're going to talk about innovation, can we put a particularly unique and defensible and ownable, like a thematic white space on it that differentiates you from competitors? So that's where we spend an awful lot of time from a narrative positioning perspective. So they were putting a slightly different twist on their innovation positioning from old to new. And I won't read these bullets to you because I'll get to showing you some other slides, but essentially, and this was a new client to us 2 years ago, big win, corporate agency of record in the US for them. And, you know, it was reasonably standard stuff, I suppose, in that what, you know, their objective was, we need to be thought of better. We need to improve our reputation. Okay, we say, let's, you know, we're going to track reputation and relevance for you. How will we do that? Cross-PESO, media relations, executive thought leadership, digital content strategy. You know, we'll push on all channels that make sense to push on. We will do so with a new, refined, clear corporate narrative. Okay, great, we go away, do that work. And then we will use, in this case, relevance along with Reputation Institute, RepTrack stuff in combination, data quarterly to track how are they doing against this new strategy, pushing on, yes, of course, financial performance, if you must, have to, but pushing on innovation and pushing on citizenship. Fast forward, so this is a measurement thing we're doing quarterly to show progress. Where are we gaining or losing ground on the topic of innovation and citizenship relative to specific stakeholder groups, doctors, influential consumers, policymakers, whatever. So it's telemetry, it's data quarterly to kind of course correct tactical execution, if you like. But there's also a semi-annual sort of deeper dive analysis into the content, into what's working more than not. Fast forward, and I'll show you this in a moment. Historically, this organization, as so many do, they will push against a thematic pillar of innovation or citizenship as if they are two very different things. We noticed a few nuggets in the data that, hey, you know, when you combine these things, gold, that's where things are really, really engaging for you. And if you even do that through the lens of patient centricity and do it in transparency and ethics, you sort of, we're pulling in all these levers of kind of classic reputation measurement. You put all those things together, gold. So take some risks, be agile, be emboldened to put some of these things together that previously weren't, and they do, and, you know, magic happens. So it's data to measure progress, it's data to optimize content, data to optimize positioning. I'm nearing the end here, but what I would say here that what's happening here for this particular client is that we are putting W2O relevance data alongside Reputation Institute data in as part of a broader cross-PESO strategy and a cross-PESO measurement framework. And so relevance and reputation are not the only, but the ultimate metric that the company is driving to, and the ultimate sort of guiding North Star, if you like. And I mentioned, so we're for them, we are measuring relevance overall by company on the left. We're measuring relevance by individual signal or score, individual audiences, healthcare media, investors, policymakers, and so on. And then how they're doing on topics like innovation and workplace and leadership, governance, performance. So you'll see some similarities there, far right to, again, classic reputation, dimensions and drivers. But again, all digital and all through the lens of, are we being thought about, sought out, talked about, and engaged with by these audiences on these topics, which is what allows us to come back to the client with, actionable tactical recommendations. One of which I mentioned this off the top was, hey, Mr. and Miss Organization, you historically were pushing on citizenship and innovation as two separate things. Put them together, gold. Go you one better, put them together with patient centricity and transparency, and that's rocking and rolling for you. So it's a bit like taking a battleship stuck in wet mud. It takes time to dislodge that and get them to turn tactically, but now that they're moving in a smarter direction here in terms of this working for them. That's where I'd pause, almost right on time, 20 minutes left for some discussion and some Q&A. I think my final point here, Terry and team, would be to say that we've been doing all this relevant stuff specific to COVID fortnightly, for the last number of weeks. And so that material is out there available for you all if you'd like. And I've been seeing some really great stuff coming out of Leger. Thank you, Dave and team, of late. But yeah, I think the next one is that we're outside of the issue of COVID. We're going to go and have a peek at diversity and inclusion and what it means to be a diversity and inclusion relevant organization and the anatomy thereof. We've done that annually, but certainly given civil unrest down here, we're going to have a look at that, as well as CEO responses to civil unrest down here, which is dangerous, but can be effective if it's done right. Anyway, so lots more thought leadership to come from us at W2O on all of this relevant stuff: COVID, civil unrest, diversity and inclusion. I know that was a lot, and I know I talked quick. Too much coffee today, but thanks for the invitation. I hope some of that was intriguing and helpful, and would love to hear what you all are thinking.
The quick speaking northerner, the Canadian, right? Who they in the South, right, people confuse or always criticize me for talking too fast.
I tell them to think. They say slow down, and I say think faster. I mean, this just not going to work.
I think we're in a special point right now. I think COVID has transformed many, many things, and I think organizations are trying to be relevant within the COVID culture or the COVID context. Yep. I want to ask you more about what's happened over the last week, because I think COVID, all of us, I hate that term, we're all in this together. We seem to be, in many different respects in that same kind of arena, although different groups have been affected more significantly, and that may be playing in to this week as well. You talked about organizations to be relevant, you have to take risks.
Yep.
And isn't this double R, right, the sort of intersection of what culture is today? Right, we have a really relevant issue in terms of African American community, Black community as well. These are relevant issues that are important in a political sense. They're relevant in a social cultural perspective as well. How, as Kim Yielding is just asking, how do companies respond to this? How do you take that risk? Because it's a very complex issue.
Yeah, I would say so. I think the answers are very different. COVID versus civil unrest, very different. I do have some COVID slides that I can show you here in a minute if we want to, delve into that. I would say, remember that one of the key core, and this is almost crisis management 101, 2. We spend an awful lot of time there. One of the key core tenets of relevance is if you are always on, attuned to your stakeholders, even in good times, in the best of times, and investing in that goodwill bank, then come crisis, then you are more resilient. And it's not just that your stakeholders are going to be more willing to advocate for you on your behalf. It's that if you're attuned to stakeholders on an ongoing basis, you are giving them what they need. And you are generally some exceptions, yet transparent, you are authentic, you are frequent. So this is, it's a relationship. It's not, so it's kind of classic. And again, it's really a 30, 40, 50-year-old, communications theory idea of, rather than spray and pray, mass communications, put a press release out there, hope for coverage, gone. We're shifting to community and conversation, influencers and stakeholders, and your reputation, your brand is in their hands, not your own. And so it's an always on relationship with these folks. So I think if you've got that figured out pre-COVID, then you're more likely to be in a better position COVID. And the data, the deep dive analysis we just did 2 weeks ago, where we looked at kind of COVID longitudinally, not every 2 weeks, but since January 1 through mid-May, shows that if you were relevant before, you're more likely to be relevant during. That, and I can show you this in a bit too, that there was this sense of being let me find it, Chumley, rather than stumble around it. So there we go, that's clever. Then COVID changed everything, or did it? Not really. So similar theme clustering, what is this? This is COVID-19 since January 1, kind of the Captain Obvious no duh slide, absolutely eclipsing every other topic in the healthcare space in US. Look at the number on the bottom. So it's 270,000 articles. It's almost 800 million shares. So again, it's not what's being most written about, but most engaged with. What's on the hearts and minds of people? What do they feel strongly enough about to engage with and share? Corona, COVID is the orange mountain top ridgeline on the bottom. So eclipsed everything else, massively spiked mid to late March, but oddly, unfortunately, maybe, has declined in engagement since. So people are just tired. They're engaging less with COVID stuff. I should point out, this is print online. This is not broadcast, not the 24-hour kind of Fox News, CNN. So to say coverage is waning, engagement is waning seems contradictory when you think of kind of 24-hour broadcast news cycle. But so what's my point? There was an early mover advantage to companies that recognize that, oh gosh, this COVID thing is going to be around for a while. We need to get out there with something more than just the cliched CEO letter to employees. We need to do something more than just get our employees working from home and safe. We need to be loving on and mindful of every single darn stakeholder we've got. And so here's what some of those findings were. Again, this idea of a first movers showed strength. There were a number of fast followers who, guess what? No surprise, really, really struggled with timing and authenticity. Example, I've forgotten the fellow's name, but Delta CEO was among the first to go out and make an announcement very early on that he would forego his own salary and his executive team and pump that money back into the organization. Met with praise. 4 weeks later, companies tried it, and they did it in the context of having to lay off or furlough employees. Guess what? Backfired. So great idea. Terrible timing. So a fast follower, doesn't work. This idea, second one is this idea of like, if you're not out there with authentic stuff that's tuned into, the political, cultural, societal currency and urgency, or if you're not out there at all, frankly, if you are conspicuously absent, then you're going to have a problem. We had a number of clients come to us and say, we don't really have a stake in the COVID game. We don't have a skin in the game. We don't have a vaccination that we're working on. So we think we're just going to sit this one out. Guess what? Nobody sits this one out. Not even, no healthcare companies, but no Fortune 100 tech company should be sitting this out. It's this big that you need to be out there with a point of view on it, loving on your stakeholders. And so finally, to this fourth bit, and again, this is kind of reputation, relevance, crisis 101, that we noticed, Captain Obvious, that the biggest predictor of relevance during COVID was to have been relevant before COVID, and that's still true. Now, okay, pivot to civil unrest. As horrifyingly callous as this sounds, civil unrest has killed COVID in terms of media attention and engagement. It just has. We're going to run these numbers again in kind of Friday and over the weekend. And I imagine we're going to see that orange ridge line go down to almost nothing, and all things diversity and inclusion, race riots, protesting, looting is going to go like hockey stick. Haha, Canada. And so what we're going to be looking at next week is CEO response to civil unrest. What's, some that are hitting the mark and some that are not. Companies that are hitting the mark like Nike, Peloton. Again, why? These are companies who figured out their brand, they figured out their stakeholders, they know what is authentic and attuned to these folks, And so when they're placed in a crisis, COVID or civil unrest, it's a tiniest little bit of an extension into, we know who we are as an organization. We know what our folks want. Of course, we go and do this, and it's well received. Ta-da. So like relevance is not something you instantly or immediately gain in a crisis or because of a crisis. Yeah, good luck. No hope in hell. If you weren't before, you're not going to be during or after.
Yeah, if you're not relevant now, and you should be relevant, it's going to be a very difficult time for the organization. And your stakeholder groups, if you're a publicly traded company, the markets will not really see your inaction because you'll be paralyzed. You won't know what to do, and this shouldn't. That's not the kind of company that organizations are expecting.
Absolutely right.
One question from Don Smith said, how much of a challenge do you face bringing clients or potential clients up to speed on the concept of relevance before they buy into it?
It can be a challenge. They are accustomed to the reputation institutes of this world down here in the US, maybe less so in Canada. And so we know, and again, all deference to the fine work that I know, Terry, you and Dave Schultz are doing with Leger. But at least here in the States, the Reputation Institute or even the Harris Reputation Quotient, kind of secondarily, tertiarily, have become kind of the Kleenex of the category, if you know what I mean, where C-suite, a chief comms officer says, I need to measure reputation, they go and find the Reputation Institute. Okay. And gosh, they've been around for 30 some odd years. Charles Fombron back in the day. Great. So huge traction, huge penetration, huge market awareness. And again, measuring reputation has almost become synonymous with Reputation Institute. Great. Why do I tell you that? Well, because typically the question for us begins with, hey, we've got Reputation Institute. What is this weird, wacky, squishy relevance stuff? It sounds a bit hippie. What is this? And we say, well, they're different in theme, spirit, and intent, but they can be complementary. Imagine the classic Venn diagram. These things can work together. They can triangulate together. We show them case studies where we are doing exactly that for major companies. But to be honest, there are some cases where clients are saying, we love the Reputation Institute stuff. I'll be careful here. What's maybe sometimes lacking is, because it's a research company, not a communication strategy company, are the recommendations, the strategy, and the tactics. And so we say, okay, well, we're happy to work with you and Reputation Institute. And we do. For some clients, we get access to that data for them. And we're happy to bring to that table or that party this always on digital healthcare audience specific kind of engagement view as a complement, not a replacement to. So I think, answer your question, in that context where we say it's not an or, it's an and, we will do both. And what it's going to do for you is, maybe more than a number on a quarterly or an annual scorecard, is tell you exactly what you could and should do, and in a way that's predictive, because we've got historical patterns on what has worked. Then they go, aha. I don't care that it's particularly weird and squishy and hippie, but that it's going to make their work smarter and deliver bottom line for them is how we get through that. But it is a process. And typically it takes 3 or 4 discussions with them over 4 to 6 weeks to sort of introduce them to it, show them a case study, walk them through what it could mean to them. Sometimes we'll go and pull some data specific to them to intrigue or frighten them into realizing that they've got some gaps to close.
Some have asked the question. So this is great for Fortune 100 companies, big pharma, but we're a small, publicly financed institution. We're a small, medium enterprise. How do we even begin to get our arms around running a 3-person communication shop and doing this?
Yeah, I get that question every day. And here's the answer. One, we can go far deeper than Fortune 100 or even, Fortune 1001. 2, I would say, you don't necessarily need, whether it's ours or somebody else's method, you don't necessarily need this big, fancy, time-consuming, expensive stuff to be attuned to your stakeholders. That's the key. So if we go way back, hold on, you're going to get seasick here for a moment. Please hold, everybody. Way back, playback. Oh my God, Chun-Li, there we go. You don't necessarily need data to support this as a way of thinking, a way of operating, and a guiding principle. If this is, I know nobody has a baffle anymore, nobody prints anything, but print this out, stick it to the baffle beside your phone, beside your desk. Have a look at this from time to time. Is everything that you are doing mindful of this frame generally? Then you're going to see your bar move, whatever that bar is. I don't think you need 10 data sources and 25 metrics to show you that this is the case. So it's about engagement. It's about tuning into urgency, currency, relevancy. It's about being agile, and it's about ever mindful of your stakeholders and what they're talking about, what they need. Shooting myself in the foot here. You don't necessarily need data for that. We'd love to give it to you, but as a mindset, as a principle and a guiding star and a way of thinking and operating, I think there's something here. And this is hardly radical. This is not W2O. I'm sure you've all seen some sort of slide like this before in a multitude of other decks. Understand your audience and give them what they need and what they expect within reason.
So this is put on your great Chumley hat for a moment and talk specifically about technology. I think organizations have a sense of where technology is going, especially with things like AI, augmented reality, politics, and policy. You can understand where that's going on a global basis. I think obviously the next 6 months will be very interesting. 5 months will be very interesting. What are you hearing from a relevancy alignment of a cultural and generational expectations?
Interesting. What I hear is near exclusively at the moment internally focused. Chief comms officers are really wrestling with, and again, not brought on because of COVID, but accelerated because of COVID. Any sort of macro trend or transformational trend, digital transformation inside the organization, for example, COVID just put a magnifying glass on that and an accelerator on that. So it's forcing organizations, for example, to think more quickly and adapt more quickly than they were hoping or wanting to do before COVID, in terms of employees working from home, in terms of giving everyone $1,000 to furnish their home office that they didn't have historically, in terms of how we, and you hinted at this off the top of the call, how do you foster culture when nobody's in the same place physically? And so I think organizations are aware that, yes, there's something that needs to be thought through and fixed externally, but they really are glomming onto this begin within. We've got to sweat our employees first, culture first, and what that looks like. And so it could mean everything technological, from we're all on Zoom meetings or some similar all darn day now. If you're anything like me, it's probably 13 hours a day, yuck, versus technology to reach them, to communicate with them. So chief comms officers and employee relations officers are scrambling now to really tighten up their kind of tech stack in terms of the tools they're using to communicate with employees, how and where and when, how frequently. They are even having to think through, again, this external engagement and advocacy bit. Is there a tool that we could or should be putting in front of our employees to give them sort of syndicated, pre-approved company messaging content that makes it easy for them to hit go, so that employees are advocating for us externally? So it's culture, it's messaging, and it's platforms. Ultimately, companies are scrambling on their internal tech stack at the moment. You may know some of these guys. We're big fans of Dynamic Signal. There are other companies out there called Social Chorus, Everyone's Social. So it's much more than this, but syndicated content that comes to you as an employee. Congratulations, we've won XYZ award. Great, make it easy for me as an employee to hit, and syndicates it out to my personal networks. Great. What's my point? Those folks, those business development folks, are probably among the busiest on the planet right now. They're going bonkers because these chief comms officers are trying to take this minute while employees are at home to shore up their tech stack.
Right. Unfortunately, we're out of time. We could have this conversation all day long. I mean, and just to catch up with Alan, I'm so glad that we've reconnected. You're doing a great job.
Thank you.
With the W2O group. These are really important issues that I believe we're all trying to come to grips with as well. And obviously having insights and data will help us as communicators be better advocates and counselors to our organizational leadership as well. So thanks a lot for taking the time. Say hello to
Thank you.
Jim and
I
Gary
will.
and all the W2O disciples for us. And we hope to catch you at some point in person. Thanks also for your work on the IPR Measurement Commission. I know that's an important area for all of us. So
Love it. My pleasure.
all the best, and keep safe.
Go Canada. Maybe I'll cross the border one of these days.
All the
Go
best.
team. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks
Bye-bye.
a lot. Bye-bye.